All right, so have you ever tried to make a change stick? Like really stick, especially in an organization?
It's like trying to nail jelly to a tree, isn't it?
Exactly. And today we're diving into that challenge head on.
Yeah.
Organizational change management.
Mm.
Specifically, how to conquer that ever-present status quo. And to make it even more interesting, we'll focus on how all of this plays out with something as intricate as a TPM implementation.
Because let's be honest, who hasn't been tempted by that comfortable, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality?
Right. It's practically human nature. If it's working, why rock the boat? But here's the catch, Nick. You wouldn't be listening to this if you weren't aiming for something better, right? Even if it means shaking things up a bit.
That drive for improvement, that's what TPM is all about. But think about it. That comfy status quo we all love provides stability even when it's not perfect. It's familiar, and that familiarity, it often trumps the unknown, even if the unknown holds the promise of something better.
It's like choosing those comfy old shoes, even if they're a bit worn out,
Oh.
over the brand new ones that might give you blisters, even if they do look amazing in the store.
Exactly. And that's precisely why getting a handle on resistance, those blisters of organizational change, is so important, especially for something as potentially disruptive as, you guessed it, a TPM rollout. If you don't address it head on, even the most brilliant TPM strategies, well, they could be met with roadblocks at every single turn.
And it's not always as simple as people being dead set against the change itself, is it?
Not at all.
Our research points to a bunch of reasons why these change initiatives, they just hit a wall. And they're not always obvious. What are some of those hidden tripwires?
Well, Ricardo, from our source material, nails down a few. One is that fear of job security, right? Another is confusion about what the changes actually mean for individuals. Then there's the big one, fear of the unknown. And here's the thing, these aren't just logistical hurdles we're talking about.
Oh, they go way deeper than that.
We're talking deep-seated emotional responses to change.
Because change, no matter what kind, it disrupts our comfort zones. It throws uncertainty into the mix.
And it can even shake up those existing power structures, which is, let's be honest, a bit like poking a sleeping bear in the organizational world.
So no wonder people get a little, should we say, resistant.
Exactly.
It reminds me of that company, the one, they decided to introduce all this cutting-edge technology. Sounds great in theory, right?
Right.
But then their employees resisted because they had to learn a whole new system.
Yeah.
All that good intention just kind of backfired.
It's a classic example of how change, even when it's positive on paper, can trigger anxiety.
Yeah.
And that's precisely why getting to the bottom of that resistance, really unpacking it, it's non-negotiable if you're planning on successfully leading a TPM implementation or, frankly, any kind of change that you actually want to stick.
Okay, so we're talking about really digging deep, right?
Yeah.
Understanding those emotional things that are driving resistance underneath the surface. How do we even begin to figure that out? It's like we need a map or something, especially if we want to guide a TPM implementation through those choppy waters.
You're exactly right. It's easy to feel lost, but luckily there's a sort of compass for this, and it's called Heller's Change Management Model.
Okay, so Heller's Change Management Model. Break it down for us. What makes it so valuable, especially in this context?
All right, so imagine this. Instead of a straight line to success, picture a curve, kind of like a roller coaster ride, where morale and productivity, they actually take a dip before things start looking up.
So what you're saying is even with the absolute best planning in the world, we should expect a little bit of a slump at first. That's kind of reassuring, but also a bit scary at the same time.
Well, it's the truth about change, isn't it? Heller's model, what it does is it maps out this emotional roller coaster, showing those critical stages that people go through. You've got denial, where people just resist the whole idea of change altogether. Then there's anger, the whole why us, why now phase. And then just when you think you're in the clear, you get bargaining, the okay, maybe but stage. It's only after you get through all of that emotional stuff that you actually reach acceptance.
Gotcha. So if we think about like a TPM implementation, but through the lens of this model, we should probably expect at least a little pushback, especially in those first couple of phases, right?
Absolutely.
Like denial might sound something like, our old system works perfectly fine, why bother changing? And then anger could be that frustration with, say, new software or new tracking procedure.
Exactly. And that right there is where leadership is so, so important. Recognizing those emotional responses and actually addressing them instead of just trying to power through can make or break a TPM rollout.
Yeah, because it's not even close to enough to just tell people, hey, this is what we're doing, so get on board. We have to actually bring them along, really address what they're concerned about, make them feel like they're part of the solution.
100%. Think of it this way. Would you rather be told to jump straight into a freezing cold lake or be, gradually eased in?
Gradual easing
Yeah,
every
exactly.
single time. So easing people into the change,
hmm
how does that actually work in the real world?
It's about putting those support systems into place that make the whole transition smoother. Clear communication, that's obviously huge, but not just from the top down. We need those open forums where people can actually voice what's bothering them, ask questions, and, this is key, actually feel heard. Even simply acknowledging how tough it can be to transition to a new system, especially something like TPM, that can go a long way in building trust and easing those feelings of uncertainty.
And I bet that's where that classic question comes in. What's in it for me?
100%. You've got to answer that and answer it well, especially with a TPM implementation.
Because, I mean, if someone is used to doing things a certain way and all of a sudden you're introducing TPM, which might mean more data entry, brand new procedures, and maybe even a whole other level of accountability, you need to spell out how this change will actually benefit them personally.
Right, you have to connect the dots for them. How does this TPM thing connect to their own goals and needs? Will TPM make their job easier in the long run, even if there's a learning curve at the beginning? Will it help their team's performance and contribute to their own career growth? Those are the questions that leaders really need to be prepared to answer.
So it comes down to making that personal connection, showing them this change isn't just some abstract, good for the company thing. It's good for them as individuals.
Exactly. And you know what? That's where our source material offers some really smart strategies, not just for dealing with resistance, but for actually making it work for you.
Okay, now that's interesting. How do we go from this place of just battling resistance to actually using it as fuel for good change,
Hey.
especially with TPM where things can feel so technical, so process-oriented?
It's about recognizing that resistance itself. It's often giving us feedback, whether we realize it or not. It shows us where people are struggling, where they're confused, where maybe their needs aren't being met. One really powerful strategy for doing this is what our source calls promising problems.
Promising problems. All right, I'll bite. That sounds like the opposite of what you'd normally do.
I know, right? Sounds strange, but think about it. Haven't you noticed that people tend to trust those who are upfront about potential problems more than those who promise everything will be perfect and then it's not?
Yeah, it's like the difference between a leader who seems truly prepared and one who's just, I don't know, sugarcoating things.
Exactly. When you promise problems, you're acknowledging that TPM implementation, no matter how well you plan, it's probably going to have a few bumps along the way.
So instead of saying this amazing new TPM system is going to revolutionize everything, it'll be easy peasy from now on, you're saying, look, we're all going to have to learn and adapt here, and we're bound to hit some snags. But here's how we're going to tackle them together.
Now you're getting it. You're showing that you've really thought this through, you're prepared for the hiccups that might pop up, and you're not shying away from those challenges. That kind of honesty, that transparency, it builds so much trust. And trust is everything for successful change, especially with something as complicated as TPM.
That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like people can spot a sugarcoating a mile away, but when you're honest about the potential downsides, it tells them you're being real with them, like you're all in this together.
Exactly. And that shared understanding, that sense of being in it together when things get tough, that's powerful stuff. It can actually turn resistance into a chance to solve problems together. When people feel safe to speak up about their worries, you're way more likely to catch those issues before they become huge problems that derail the whole initiative.
So promising problems isn't about being all doom and gloom. It's about being realistic and upfront, which makes communication that much stronger.
100%. And since we're on the topic of communication, another really effective strategy that our source talks about is what Pritchard calls outrunning the resistors.
Outrunning the resistors. I have to admit, it sounds a little harsh, maybe.
It's not about being harsh. It's more about using your energy strategically. Instead of getting stuck trying to convince every single person who's hesitant about this TPM rollout, you put your energy into the people who are already open to change.
So finding and empowering those early adopters, the folks who are actually excited about TPM and want to jump into those new systems and processes.
Bingo. Those early adopters, those natural leaders in your organization, they're your secret weapon.
Because enthusiasm, it's contagious.
100%. Instead of wasting your time trying to drag people along, you focus on turning up the volume on the people who are already on board. They become your TPM champions, your internal cheerleaders, who can then influence their colleagues, share their success stories, and show everyone the very real benefits of the new system.
So it's not about getting everyone on board at the exact same time. It's more about creating a ripple effect of positive change.
That's it. Think about it like this. Would you rather try to push a giant boulder up a hill or set it rolling down a hill?
I'm starting to get it. Catch more flies with honey, right?
Exactly.
Focus on the folks who are already drawn to the good stuff that change can bring, and the rest, they might just surprise you.
They really might. And when you really think about it, that's how most big successful movements actually gain traction. It's not usually about flipping the script for every single skeptic out there. It's about starting a fire that just kind of naturally spreads. And with TPM, those early wins, those success stories that your own people are shouting from the rooftops, well, those become your most powerful marketing tool.
It's like having social proof, but inside your organization. Like if John from accounting, he's going on and on about how this new TPM software has made his life so much easier as coworkers, they're way more likely to actually give it a shot than if management is just telling them, hey, this is better, but not really explaining why.
You got it. People trust their colleagues, and they trust what they see working. So remember this when you're trying to make a change happen, especially something like TPM that's all about the details. Never underestimate the power of letting your most enthusiastic people lead the charge. Let them be the example.
So we've talked about really understanding resistance, how to tackle it head on, and even how to use it to help us. But before we wrap things up, can we go back to something you mentioned earlier? That whole picture of change as a roller coaster ride, those dips in morale, those moments where productivity takes a hit. How do we keep the energy up, especially when those dips inevitably hit? It feels like we need more than a strategy here. We need, I don't know, maybe a little cheerleading along the way.
You're spot on, you really do. It's not enough to just launch the TPM thing and then, just sit back and expect miracles. You've got to actively create a culture that supports change, that keeps it alive. And a big part of that is celebrating the wins along the way, even the small ones.
Because when you recognize and celebrate those victories, no matter how small, it's like throwing fuel on the fire of change.
100%. Think about it. Change is, by its very nature, uncertain, and it can be kind of uncomfortable. It takes real effort, the willingness to adapt, and sometimes even a little bit of sacrifice, to be honest. When you celebrate wins, even those small steps forward, it does a couple of really crucial things. First, it reminds everyone why they're putting in the effort in the first place, all those positive impacts of the change. And second, it combats that dreaded change fatigue, that feeling of burnout you can get when it seems like you're constantly swimming upstream.
So it's not just about that finish line way off in the distance. It's about acknowledging those milestones we hit along the way, those moments when you can say, hey, we're actually making progress here. And when you're dealing with something like TPM, which can be so detail-oriented, those smaller wins, they can really add up over time.
Absolutely. And another thing, celebrating wins, it doesn't have to mean throwing a party every single time someone fills out a TPM log without messing up. It's about making acknowledgement and appreciation just a normal part of how you do things, part of your culture.
So how do you actually do that? Especially when people are working remotely or in different locations? It's not always as simple as just gathering everyone for a slice of cake these days.
You're right, you need to get creative. Think public acknowledgement, like a shout out during a team meeting, or a post on your company's forum highlighting someone's awesome TPM implementation. You could even try virtual badges or awards that tie back to your company's values. And don't underestimate the power of a handwritten note from a manager just acknowledging someone's hard work.
Because those small gestures, those little moments of recognition, they matter. They remind people that what they do actually makes a difference. They're not just another cog in the machine. They're valued members of the team, all working towards something bigger.
Yeah, that feeling of being part of something larger than yourself, a shared mission, that's what makes change stick.
This has been great. As we wrap up, what's the one big thing you want our listeners to take away from our conversation?
If there's one thing to keep in mind when you're starting your own change management journey, no matter what kind of change it is, it's this. Leading change, especially something as impactful as TPM, it's about so much more than just, ticking boxes and implementing systems. It's about leading with empathy, communicating clearly and consistently, and never, ever forgetting that human element.
Because in the end, organizations, they're made up of people. And when we lead with people at the center of our strategies, that's how we create change that lasts, change that actually makes things better. It's about understanding where people are coming from, listening to their points of view, and bringing them along with you on the journey, one step at a time.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's a wrap on today's deep dive into the world of organizational change management. Remember, that status quo, it might be comfy, but it's not usually how we get things done. So, embrace the challenge, lead with your heart, and don't forget to celebrate those wins along the way. Until next time, keep your minds curious and those change-making muscles nice and limber.